I go straight to item number 8, which is the application for Chancery House.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, councillors, members of the public. So the first application on your agenda is at Chantry House. You'll see from the paperwork you've got 2 applications before you. Both are to be determined separately. You've got the full application, which is this item here, which is for the conversion of the existing hotel into 11 residential flats and the erection of 4 single-storey dwellings to the rear. And then you've got a separate listed building application that relates solely to the conversion of the Chantry House building in the former hotel, and that's a separate item on the agenda. We brought this application to committee because it's associated with the listed building application, so we took the view for completeness to bring both applications to committee, even though technically this falls outside the scheme of delegation. The proposal say it's bringing forward a vacant hotel to 11 flats and further 4 detached dwellings. The officer recommendation before members is one of refusal on the grounds of lack of suitable drainage and flood risk, and also lack of infrastructure provision, including affordable housing contribution. So this is an aerial image of the site. You can see Chantry House there, and I've got a slide in a moment that shows you the previous planning approval. Chantry House itself is a grade 17 century listed building, previously built as a house, then subsequently became a school, and more recently a hotel, but has been vacant for a couple of years now. It's set within the Churchgate Street conservation area, and you can see at the bottom of the screen, I don't know if here you go. These are the dwellings that I'll show you in a minute that were approved as part of the previous application dating back to 2015. And you've got the entrance to the site just up here.
Just click on it.
Doesn't work.
Just click
Yes,
on
it
it.
doesn't. There we go.
Okay.
So this is a previous approval. This was granted in 2016. You can see edged in red, there was 8 hotel pods, single storey. The elevations of those are at the bottom of your screen. To me, they look like kind of garage blocks, single storey. You had the conversion of the list of the building, the hotel, into 12 units, and there were 14 detached dwellings. So this consent has been implemented by virtue of the access point and these 14 dwellings. So this permission here is extant, and the applicant or the owner of the site could continue to build out the rest of this scheme in accordance with those approved plans. Okay, this is the existing site plan. So you've just got the existing Chantry House. This is the existing car parking that was implemented as part of that 2015 consent. This is a proposed site plan. I say this seeks in total permission 15 dwellings, most of which are contained within the converted hotel, with these 2 pairs of semi-detached single-storey dwellings located in a similar location to what those 8 pods were previously, albeit on a slightly greater footprint than what was previously approved. The mix of the units, both the semi-detached and here, is contained within page 8 of your report. Car parking is proposed through the existing courtyard, you can see on the left of the screen, and also there's secure parking provided as well. As I say, during the life of the application, there were revisions to the scheme, particularly in terms of these 4 bungalows at the bottom, primarily to increase the garden space, so they complied with our garden space standards. So what you see on the screen before you is a result of discussions between the council and the applicant. Just run through some elevations. So this is the existing front elevation. The existing east, you can see the gravelled area where there's car parking. The existing west elevation. This is view from the west on Hobbs Cross Road. And this is from the site access that also serves Chantry Gardens, and you can see the access into the site through the black gates, and the area of parking is just to the side and the front of that building. And these are the planning applications drawing the existing elevations. So turning to the proposed elevations, so these are all listed in the plans pack. So this is the existing front elevation. You can see at the rear the single-storey dwellings with the Chantry Gardens properties behind, all single-storey. This is the proposed east elevation, the proposed west, and the proposed rear. Just turning to some of the floor plans. First, second, and these are the siting of the new dwellings, the front elevation of the dwellings, the rear. Turning to the key considerations, to say these are as listed on the screen and in your report. So turning to the principle of development, as you'll see there's an extant consent on the site that could be built out, and that's a material consideration for members' deliberation this evening. The amount of accommodation included within that previous permission is actually greater development than what is currently being provided, albeit the footprint is slightly less than what is currently proposed, but the numbers of units is less than what was granted in 2015. The site, so it's got its previous, it's in the settlement boundary. There is policy support for additional residential development in settlement boundaries subject to the details being acceptable. And obviously there is a theme within national policy and local policy for the delivery of housing in sustainable locations, and officers feel that this is such a location, being within reach of services and facilities to support additional development. Turning to the impact on heritage assets, you'll see in your report that the Council's heritage consultant, who is a statutory consultee on the application, is happy with the scheme. They consider it, given the subordinate nature of the buildings, their impact on the setting of the listed building is acceptable. They go on to say that the main view would be from the stretch of Churchgate Street, Hobbs Cross Road, between those buildings. Over this relatively short stretch, views would be of single-storey buildings set between some 36 to 40 metres back from the site boundary. And in the context of a backdrop of the two-storey houses set at a higher level within Chantry Gardens. Taking this into account, it is considered that no material harm would result to the character and appearance of the conservation area. The impact on the listed building in terms of the internal configuration, that will be subject to the separate listed building application that's next on the agenda. But the heritage consultant is happy with the proposal in terms of the impact on heritage assets. Turning to trees and landscaping, 3 trees are proposed to be removed within the scheme. They're shown on the plans. The landscaping details submitted include the planting of 8 new trees within the site, the enhancement of grassland area to include wildflower planting, and native rich species hedgerow. It is regrettable that there is a loss of some trees on the site, but overall there is a net gain of trees on the site. The site also doesn't benefit from any designated biodiversity status, but there is proposed, but the ecological value has been demonstrated to be enhanced by the proposed wildflower and native hedge planting. And in terms of the biodiversity, there is a biodiversity net gain across the site through this additional hedge planting. So that's detailed in your report, members. Turning to residential amenity, as I say, that's been raised by some of the objectors to the scheme. You will see their comments raised within the report. The separation between the new bungalows and the existing houses in Chantry Gardens would be approximately 14.4 metres at the closest point and 19.7 at the furthest. In addition, the bungalows would be set 1.2 metres below the road level. These figures comply with our standards, design standards in terms of separation levels, and are therefore considered acceptable in terms of the impact on those residents opposite. There would be some loss of view over the rear garden area, but the planning system doesn't protect any private views, it just protects public views. Therefore, the impact on the residential amenity is considered acceptable, having due regard to standards and policies in the local plan and the design addendum, but also having due regard to the previous planning consent on the site that had development in a very similar location to those properties that have subsequently been approved and built in Chantry Gardens. The standard of accommodation also that complies in terms of the internal standard, and also the garden space complies with standards in our local plan and is considered acceptable. We accept that the flats don't have any private amenity space, and being a listed building, you couldn't put balconies on those buildings. But there is a significant area of amenity space set within the grounds that would benefit those residents that they have access to. So the officer's view, therefore, is in terms of the standard of accommodation, both internal and external, the proposal is compliant and acceptable. Turning to parking and highways, Essex County Council raised no objection to the application. The level of parking is compliant with car parking standards. That has already been set out and put in place through the 2015 consent, and they're also proposing the provision of cycle parking to encourage alternative means of transport. The site is also in a sustainable location, which is walking distance from key services and facilities. There have been some comments referring to access difficulties for emergency vehicles, members. However, the Fire and Rescue Service have considered the access and found it meets their requirements, and the Highways Authority raised no objections. And indeed, the access has not deviated from the previous consent that was granted and considered acceptable from all those matters as it was granted planning permission. Turning to affordable housing and infrastructure, this forms one of the reasons for refusal. The application's been with the council for approximately 2 years now. A viability assessment was submitted with the application that came to the conclusion that it was not viable to provide infrastructure or affordable housing. We sought an independent view on that differed from their perspective. There have been negotiations between parties, but we remain at an unagreed position on that. And given that we need to make a decision on the application, the recommendation is to include that as a reason for refusal, so that can be dealt with should they wish to appeal or submit a revised application, and matters of infrastructure and affordable housing can then be bottomed out. But at the moment, we're not in an agreed position that it is not viable to make those provisions. And finally, turning to flooding, this again forms a reason for refusal. When the application was first placed on consultation with the local lead flood authority, they did not seek to object to the application. There was subsequently a serious instance of flooding in the area. We then resorted to go back to the flood authority to discuss those matters with them, and they sought additional information and upfront details. Again, this is a position that has not been agreed between parties, and they have not to date submitted an acceptable drainage scheme to satisfy the council that the site is okay from drainage and flooding perspective. And given that we need to reach a decision on the application, the recommendation is one for refusal on grounds of flooding also. So in terms of summary, officers consider, having regard to the previous consent, planning policy and desired guidance and the considerations of our statutory consultees, the application is acceptable in terms of its principal, heritage, landscaping design and highways. However, there are still significant matters relating to infrastructure, including affordable housing and viability, and therefore the recommendation before members is refusal based on those two reasons that are on the screen and listed on page 21 in your report, members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much. So I'll call the order I've got. Louise Coombs, would you like to come up? You've got 3 minutes. If you'd like to press the red button.
Do you want to let me know when you want me to?
Oh, you've got a presentation, haven't you?
I'll put my glasses on so I can see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're still restricted to 3 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Could you turn your mic on, please?
I wasn't aware that we were going to be able to speak twice. So with this application, if I could pause and therefore only speak about half the PowerPoint that you have now and then reinstate that when I get back up again.
On the second application.
Well, or you can do 6 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't mind, but I'll do it the way that we've spoken. Okay. So my name's Louise Coombs. I live at number 1 Chantry Gardens, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Jones London, and I'm a fully qualified interior architect. When we first were issued with these drawings, one of the first concerns was obviously the 4 houses, but at the same time, the location of the bin store. It's been located 5 different locations and been subject to the latest drawing changes. But why has the location of the bins been the main focus here? That really shouldn't be the case. The location on the latest drawing for the bins is directly adjacent to our boundary wall. nowhere near where the properties are, highlighted in that image on the bottom right-hand corner. This shows plenty of space for parking and bins, and it shows the current bin location. The landscape master plan, which was issued to the planners, shows an infill of planting in the top left-hand corner, the top yellow square, where the bins should really sensibly be located. And note, on the right-hand side, there's a hatched area, which the landscape master plan, which was submitted as part of this, which states a no-dig zone, and it's highlighted and hatched in red. The flooding in May 2023, the whole village was subjected to a severe flood. The local flood authority, as a result of that, put a holding objection to the granting of planning. The drainage report, which was issued by the developer, only highlighted how there wasn't a viable solution. Digging a suds and taking out mature trees is not a solution for solving a flooding, high flood risk area. The inaccuracy of the drawings, the topography on all of the drawings has never been addressed and amended, and I've flagged it 5 times with every application that's been put forward and every amendment. They do not have the right topography for the drawings. Following on from that, the height of the dwelling changes depending on their narrative. How could the elevation ever be considered to be single storey? The middle one on the right-hand side, where there's a red dotted line, it's above the dual story of the original building, so that's not a single story, it's dual height. Secondly, within the drainage report, a mistake shows the true intent, where it mentions 3 two-storey detached houses, and that's what's referenced in their application for their drainage. The design of the dwellings are not considered at all. There are beds in front of windows, pantries with a 400mm access space, and the entire ceiling in the living area is south-facing glass. Where would the lights go? There'd be no lighting over an island, no lighting over a dining table, no lighting over the entire lounge area. And bearing in mind that glass and the bifold windows are south-facing. The no-dig zone, as shown on the landscape drawing, is where they've moved their 2 middle buildings forward to. So that contradicts that. I've had my 3 minutes, and I'm going to stop, and I'll come back and talk again in a minute. Thank you.
Sorry? That's okay. Okay. Next I've got Mel Fordham. Again, you have 3 minutes.
Is the microphone live?
Sorry?
Is the microphone currently live? Yeah. Sure. Firstly, I'd like to thank the committee for giving me the opportunity to voice our concerns. The proposed development significantly impacts on us, not only as individual affected party, but all the residents of Chantry Gardens. As such, it's a matter of great concern for us all. In that respect, I would confirm I'm the director of Chantry Gardens Freehold Management Company that takes care of the communal parts of Chantry Gardens. The location of the bungalows is some 1.2 metres below our service road and suffers serious issues of prolonged saturation and flooding, even in moderate rainfall. I have provided photographic evidence of this to the council previously. This in isolation make the occupation of the proposed properties very problematic and potentially hazardous. To facilitate the construction of the bungalows, the proposal is to remove and grub up 2 established trees, one of which was subject to a TPO until very recently. Removal of the trees and other vegetation significantly increases the risk of ground heave, raises the height of localised water table, and yet further increases flood risk. May I respectfully remind the council, planning was originally granted for low-rise therapy rooms with living grass roofs. This subsequently morphed into an application for four bungalows with dual aspect roofs. However, it is confirmed in the Harrington's report commissioned by the developer, it's the developer's intention to build 3 two-storey houses. We as the affected community are seriously concerned. Should the 4 bungalows be approved, the developer would likely to offer the council a trade down in density to achieve the planning of the two-storey houses, which seems their real intent. Understandably, the sensitivity, the council could consider our argument as vexatious, but ask, why would any developer propose bungalows with uneconomical dual aspect roofs with skylights and Velox windows? May I politely suggest the developer was showing real intent to have legitimate argument the roof spaces could be converted to habitable rooms, supporting the application for houses at a later date. Given the number of detailed revisions, I would also politely ask the committee to consider carefully the original planning consent for the therapy rooms, from which the current proposal for the bungalows have morphed. This was specifically conditioned by this council, shall be used as hotel accommodation directly associated with the use of the proposed hotel building and for no other purpose whatsoever. For me, that is very clear and concise. Can I come back?
I'll read as fast as I can. As neighbours directly affected by this entire proposal, we have not seen any improvements in the amendments being made over a long period of time, which has been very disappointing. Whilst we have pointed out several times what has been approved previously and what was deemed acceptable by the council when this development was first approved in 2015, there has been no response or amendment from the developer nor any revision to any type of proposals, which clearly shows a complete lack of consideration for many of the valid points raised by us. Again, we found this very disrespectful. In regard to the proposed 4 new dwellings, they are not designed with any consideration for design or style of the local conservation area, and they do not reference anything to the village. Furthermore, historical planning permission was granted to Chantry House when it was a hotel for single-storey therapy rooms in the garden, on the condition that Chantry House remain as a hotel with a possible overflow to the main function of that business. Residential buildings in the garden were never permitted. I would suggest the proposal for the new 4 dwellings with the suspiciously undimensioned roofs is there at some point to allow for the amendments to double the height dwelling post-approval. To be clear, we are not in support of the 4 dwellings whatsoever, especially the double height dwellings masquerading as single-storey buildings directly in front of our homes. Even more concerning is that the plans for these new 4 dwellings have no height dimensions, particularly the roofs, which leaves everything very ambiguous. We feel that we are all being intentionally misled here for future plans. In regard to the local flood zone, it cannot cope as it stands. Any further development or tree removal could create an increased risk to the whole community. The trees and grass areas are essential for surface runoff and permutation and must be retained at all costs. In the past, water levels in this area increased considerably within an hour's worth of rate, completely flooding the road and pavement, preventing traffic or pedestrians to pass through Churchgate Street safely. As you all know, Churchgate Street is a very busy through road with access to many schools. These floods also prevent us residents from driving up to our homes in Chantry Gardens and can be very devastating to the village. Bin stores would again ask a sensible location for the bin stores proposed within the confines of their fenced-off demise. The lack of cohesive consistency within this proposal surely means that this application has to be refused on any of the points highlighted in this presentation. In fact, we have zero confidence in the architect's design and proposed plans. Also worth mentioning, as direct neighbours, whilst we're in support of the conversion of the hotel into apartments and welcome the change of use, the plans have to be designed better by any prospective buyer moving forward so they can be more sympathetic internally to what is there with accurate drawings including proposed elevations showing penetrations to the grade 2 listed roof. And as a footnote, we already know that this property is actively being marketed privately to other new buyers for a quick sale, and we are aware of at least one new developer who's made a cash offer to the owner, which shows the demand. This new developer and the others we have spoken to are only interested in converting Chantry House and intend to keep the natural habitat in the garden, which we're all happy about. In fact, we are supporting them with whatever they need. So if this developer is not successful with this application, we do hope others will learn from this developer and architect's mistakes and solely focus on the listed building and not the unnecessary other development of the gardens to benefit their yield with no regard to the local inhabitants and conservation area, including serious flood risks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Members, questions and clarifications? No? Oh,
Thank you very much, Chair. The issue concerning the bin location or bins location has been mentioned several times, and it would seem that at least 5 different locations, according to the speakers this evening, have been chosen. So where are the bins intended to be if we were to accept the application? Where's the final situation and what is the justification for that?
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of bin storage, there have been revised locations. The position shown on the latest revision K, is not acceptable to officers. It doesn't amount to a reason for refusal because it is a matter that could be conditioned. So if members were minded to approve the condition, or indeed they wanted to appeal the decision, we would seek to have a condition to agree a bin management plan to agree an acceptable location for those bins to be stored on site. But there are locations that can be done that could be acceptable in terms of the local residents and the development and the bin collection, but it's not a reason for refusal because it is a matter that could be resolved by condition, and kind of planning legislation states that where you can put a condition on, you shouldn't use that as a reason for refusal. So there could be an acceptable solution to bins, but it isn't as shown on the plans at the moment. Hope that helps.
Could I ask another question? It's clear that there has been a fair number of conversations with the developer, the applicant, and some changes, some adjustments, revisions. However, no agreement was reached on the flood issue or indeed on the affordable housing issue. So what do you see as the reason for that? It reads as though the developer has simply, or applicant I should say, has simply said, no, I'm not going to shift any further. Is that the situation?
To be honest, I can't comment on what happens their side of the fence. They were in discussion. We haven't reached an acceptable position on either of those, and that's why we've decided to bring the application before you. They're aware it's coming to committee in the recommendation. They know it's up for refusal. It's up to them how to take it forward. If members are minded to accept that recommendation, they can either take it away, resubmit a planning application with further details, or they could look to appeal this decision to the planning inspector. That's really in their gift. I can't read or understand what might be going on. That's not a matter for us.
Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. Several of the people who have raised the spoke have expressed fears about vertical expansion of dwellings on the site. Could I just clarify that given the site's location within a conservation zone, the principles of general development that would typically allow vertical expansion wouldn't apply here? Is that correct?
So if the application was approved, if members were minded to approve the application that's before you, then obviously that is conditioned on the plans that are submitted as part of this application, and that shows single-storey dwellings. The plans that would be listed obviously are scaled and they'd be measured and they would have to be built in accordance with those dwellings. It is up to the gift of any applicant or any future applicant if they wish to submit a revised application, and that would come before the council and before committee. If they wanted to make changes, we can't stop any application coming before us if it's submitted with all the correct documents, and we would assess that. But what you have seen in the report is the comments from the Heritage Advisor talking about the relationship of the single-storey buildings and the impact of single-storey buildings on the conservation area. I can't predict what comments that may come forward if they wish to go upwards, but this application, if it was approved, is for single-storey dwellings. What may come forward in the future is out of our gift. To coin a phrase, we have what we have before us.
Thank you, Chair. I think I echo a few people's fears, having been down to Churchgate Street when it was flooded, of the impact of these dwellings to further flooding and raising the flood levels should we get storms that we have done over the last few years.
Sorry, so can you just repeat what the question was, please?
So, my question is, do you see it being aspirated, the fact that by building these dwellings, we will further impact the potential of flooding, given the history over the last 2 to 3 years?
So the application before you is refusal on the grounds that they haven't submitted an acceptable drainage strategy to meet the requirements of Essex County Council Local Lead Flood Authority. So that's what the recommendation. Now, if they can overcome that to the satisfaction of the Local Lead Flood Authority, we will have to consider that for a revised application. But we can't preempt what may or may not come forward. But at the moment, those matters are at dispute between both parties.
Couple of questions, if I may. Is there a TPO on any of the trees?
No.
There was a suggestion, but
I think there was one previously on the site. I'm not aware of a TPO on the site at the moment, but obviously some of the trees that are shown... Previous tree. I mean, the position of the buildings on the approved scheme, I think, are in the same location as what the proposed housing are, so that even if they implemented the existing consent, there would be an impact on trees.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Trying to think what the other question, I didn't write it down. No, okay. Debate. Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Clearly, the application has several merits. The neighbourhood is a very desirable one, and with the local amenities being of particularly high quality. I do have sustained concerns at the lack of assurances given towards affordable housing. Just because the area is desirable, it doesn't mean young first-time buyers should be priced out of such an area. And my worry is that without the assurances of affordable housing, there is a risk that should this application go ahead, young first-time buyers would be at a disadvantage to access such a scheme.
Thank you, Chair. I'm reminding myself that I have to focus on, as we've been reminded, this application, exactly this application, the one in front of us. While, of course, all of this has some history, and I suppose we can be mindful of some of those factors, but as to what might happen afterwards, if we were to agree to accept this, then that's a different matter, really. And while I am sure everybody is keen on the idea of redevelopment of disused or unused or unsuitable building, it can be an excellent thing. But it has to be done right and sympathetically and ethically. And there are serious issues. We have already mentioned them. We've flagged them up, and it's well and truly flagged up. They are well and truly flagged up in the report. The issue to do with flooding, that issue has not been addressed, it seems to me, by the applicant. And the viability business, we keep talking about this viability. It's perfectly possible that the applicant has been paying attention to some of our discussions previously in this committee and has noticed that sometimes a developer doesn't have to, initially at any rate, do anything about that. That is affordable housing, etc. However, because a stalemate has been reached with regard to those discussions as well, I really don't think we have any other option but to refuse this application.
Thank you. Anybody else? Emma.
And thank you, Chair. Just echoing what we've heard tonight and listening to the report and listening to the objections, I think particularly the flooding is the major issue, and I think that in itself, to me, is of high concern, and the fact that we couldn't come to an agreement where that issue would be addressed. But also thinking about the affordable housing, considering that we do have a shortage of those, and being able to enable first-time buyers and people to buy those, I think is really, really important and should be considered before this committee.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Shepherd.
Sorry, just I thought I would add that on balance, the addition of biodiversity seems on the surface a merit, but as we've heard from representations made this evening, it is worth noting that the benefit of retaining those maturer trees is that their advanced root structure actually has a better quality of water retention and water actuation. So actually, whilst the scheme does propose an increase in net biodiversity, the loss of the existing trees would actually exacerbate the flood risk that we've heard about already this evening. So on those grounds, again, I'm minded to refuse the application because personally the flood risk hasn't been sufficiently mitigated against.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Councillor Livins.
Chair, I listened to the other councillors' reports, and the main thing I think too is the flooding issue. As councillors for Old Harlow, we've been concerned for a long time now about the situation in that particular area of flooding, and I think this would only increase that situation, so I would definitely be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'll say 2 words, if I may. We are, to some extent, hamstrung by the application that came before us in 2016, which is an extent permission. I'm not happy, to say the least, of what's going on. We've raised a lot of questions tonight, but it seems that they may not carry any weight, which doesn't seem quite right to me. But I think the recommendation tonight is refuse it. So I think we've got to go with that. So at least they can't build any further unless they appeal, and then we'll have to deal with what happens. So I think there's a lot of upset around. I can see what you said tonight, but I think so we'll go to the recommendation, which is on page, I've lost it again, haven't I? Page 21, which is to refuse the application on those 2 grounds, one being flooding and infrastructure and one being affordable houses. All those in favour of that recommendation? Thank you. So that's confirming the refusal as now. So right, we go now to item 9, which is the listed building consent. Are we dealing with that again? Yes. Elizabeth, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the second application relating to this site. This relates to the listed build element, which is the conversion of Chantry House into 11 flats. The report commences on page 21. I'll say this application is before you because you've had more than 2 letters of objection contrary to the officer recommendation of support. I will just whiz through the slides because you saw them just a brief moment ago. So this is the Chantry House, this is the building in question. So this is the demolition basement and ground. This is the first floor, demolition of the second floor. Then you've got the proposed basement and ground floor plans, proposed first floor and proposed second floor. So say this application relates to the conversion elements. The main, you'll see from your report on page 43, page 42, heading over to 43, the consultation response from Essex County Council Place Services. They don't object to the application, although they raise concern with regards to a small element of the conversion of Unit 7 and requests us, therefore, as decision-making to engage paragraph 202 of the NPPF that looks at weighing up the public benefit versus the harm to heritage asset. That's dealt with on page 45 of your reports. So that Unit 7 is located in the oldest part of the property, and there it is the most sensitive to change. And the Constantly advises there will be less than substantial harm to that heritage asset, which is the lowest level of harm, but there is still some harm identified. In regards to this, the applicants advised that the layout is required to meet building fire regulations. They have looked at alternative solutions for this unit. It's not possible. We therefore have weighed up the benefits versus harm in accordance with paragraph 202 that's required, and considered that the limited harm to heritage asset is outweighed by the public benefits of delivering 11 residential units and bringing back a heritage asset listed building grade 2 into a viable use and improving it visually rather than it to deteriorate any further. So in terms of the listed building element, the application chair is recommended for approval subject to the conditions as listed in your report on page 46. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So, Louise Coombs, you're coming back for your part 2?
I can answer the question about the TPOs. They were requested, but it was lapsed over COVID as the arborologist left during that time, and it slipped through the net. So that's why the TPOs have disappeared in that location. Right, getting back to the listed building. Because the planning encompassed the new dwellings and the listed building consent, the focus has not been on what's important, and what's important is that listed building. My first raise of question was, why are they moving every single ensuite that is within that development at the moment? They were installed 5 years ago to an extremely high standard with porcelanosa finishes, same level of quality as the houses and the flats to the right. They haven't been used for 3 years, and they were barely used in the 2 years that the carbon retreat functioned. The architect has proposed to move every single one, which would mean a lot more drilling through the existing slabs, through the existing framework within this building. As you can see on the screen, the 4 squares that are red, there is no wet services in that location. Getting soil vent pipes and supply and waste to those en-suites is going to be arduous for that building, and in the oldest part of the building. I really feel the architect has not worked with what's there. I really feel they probably haven't even been there. So why move those en-suites around? Why put wet services in location when there isn't any? On the first floor, no thought has been given to drainage. There's more penetrations through that listed building to swap rooms around. For example, Unit 7, as was flagged up by the Heritage Officer, if you swap those 2 rooms around where the red arrow is on that slide, if you swap the bedroom with the living room, you don't need that corridor. Therefore, the fireplace is not going to be in a corridor, and all you would need to do is just swap those 2 rooms around. But again, as you can see, on the second floor, there's proposing to strip out an ensuite and then put an ensuite back in exactly the same place. That makes no sense. But the biggest thing that I need to highlight to you is on the right-hand side, on the proposed, it's Unit 11. In the small bedroom that's been created by subdividing that room, they've put in 2 skylights. My question is, why divide up a proportionate room to create 2 small awkward rooms with no daylight in one of them and put in 2 skylights? And the next slide shows their proposed elevation doesn't show those skylights, and they are in the oldest part of the building. And the next drawing shows the proposed roof plan does not show those skylights. The architect has missed something that is so paramount to that development. The next thing is the parking. The architect has listed the number of dwellings and the number of inhabitants, which takes a total of 29. On the basis that the council guidelines set how many spaces you need per room, you only need 17 spaces. Come to the end. I could carry on and on and on, but I will hand it over to Sean to finish for me. No, I know. Okay. Where was I? It's just highlighting that 20 parking spaces, which is what is available within their confined locked, secure area is enough just for the actual old listed building, not for any additional dwellings to be added. That's okay?
Thank you. Mel Fordham, you coming back again? Thank you.
As it is common practice, the developer may argue an 11-unit conversion of the main house will be uneconomical. Given above 10 units, they will be required to include provision of social housing or make a seal contribution. I would argue the economics of the scheme must be considered as a whole of the development, that being the 14 houses of Chantry Gardens and the Chantry House flats. The conversion of the main house, not the conversion in isolation, as the three elements are intrinsically connected. If the prospective buyer of Chantry House makes the purchase on the assumption of planning, then without being mercenary, it must be caveat emptor, and not the council's responsibility to make the scheme economically viable via an increase in density. The proposed location of the refuse receptacle has been extremely contentious. Aesthetically, the current proposed location will be an eyesore on approach to our properties. Practically, residents of the converted apartments will be burdened with having to take their refuse to a location as far away from the main building as imaginable. This will undoubtedly prove a greater issue during the winter and periods of inclement weather. Operationally, refuse collectors will have to stop and block access to the gates of our properties to collect waste, which I'm sure you will all agree could prove disputatious and, in the worst case scenario, dangerous. I asked the planners, if this scheme is approved, that the refuse store is robust, self-contained and relocated within the curtilage of the existing fence car park area to ease facilitation and collection, be sympathetic to us as neighbours, minimise traffic on our joint road and reduce potential rodent manifestation. The last point I'd like to make is continuously throughout all the drawings we've been provided, in writing it says there is a provision for 21 spaces when in fact there are only 20 spaces drawn. I don't know if that would impact, but there are proposed only 20 parking spaces.
Thank you very much. Sean Nicholas, sorry. Sorry?
No. No.
Can-
No.
No, you can't do that. No. Yeah. No. One I prepared earlier.
Okay. So we already have 4,500 new homes in Gilden Way and Newhall. We have another 5,500 due, 10,000 within 2 miles of us. Why force another 4 into this scheme? Passing over to my neighbour, Sean. In conclusion, the lack of cohesive consistency within this proposal surely means that this application has to be refused on any of the points highlighted in this presentation. I have zero confidence in this architect's design and these proposed plans. Worth mentioning, as direct adjacent neighbours, whilst we are in support of the hotel being turned into apartments and welcome the change of use, this has to be designed better, to be more sympathetic internally to what is there with accurate drawings for your approval. Chantry House is currently being marketed privately to buyers for quick sale, so if this developer is not successful with their application, I hope future proposals submitted learn from the developer's mistakes and also the architects, and solely focus on the listed building and not overdevelopment of the gardens to benefit their yield. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, questions and clarification? Councillor Morrison.
Thank you very much, Chair. Quite a number of interesting points have been raised by the speakers that we've just heard, and I'd quite like to put them into question form. So I've ended up with 4 questions. One, shall I just
Yep.
Ask all the questions, or one at a time, one at a time.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is your answer to the mystery of the disappearing skylights?
I should have mentioned that. My apologies, councillors. They aren't shown on the plans. What we would look to do is put an additional condition on any approval to say authority to approve subject to receipt of amended plans to show the position of the skylights and those being acceptable to our heritage consultant. And only once we've got that in writing that they're acceptable would we then issue any approval. So it would be subject to that caveat. My apologies. I should have mentioned it. It was on my notes.
Okay, thank you. That's good. And a very interesting suggestion was made with regard to the design, the layout of the apartments, the little homes. That is to do with a switch so that Unit 7 would be on the other side. Do we have that? Do we have it within our power to encourage that, or at least consideration of that?
In short, councillor, no. We have what we have before us. These are the plans that are tabled before the committee for determination. And it is up to the gift of the applicant how they wish to do the internal configuration. It's not for us to influence that. But what we do is seek the views of the heritage advisor, who has come back and raised no objection to those internal configurations, save for one small question with regards to Unit 7 that we've considered.
Okay, number 3. A couple of people referred to what appears to be excessive parking. Given that we're now dealing with the house only, it seems far too many for 11 flats. And maybe the occupants are going to throw a lot of parties and people will stay overnight, obviously, because of their parties. Anyway, it does seem a little odd, doesn't it?
The issue of parking is a matter with the full planning application, not the listed building. This application is purely looking at the internal configuration and the changes to the internal aspect of the building rather than any external elements such as parking or bin storage. So it's purely looking at how you detail the internal and external fenestration of the listed building. So that's a separate matter that we considered through the full application.
Okay, so we have already dealt with that, so don't need to worry about it. We can worry about other things. Concern was expressed about access for waste collection vehicles. So can we reassure people on that particular issue?
Again, that's a matter with the full application, not the listed building, and we picked that issue up in terms of if you would have wanted to support the application, we would have wanted a condition on a bin management strategy, a refuse management strategy, but that isn't a matter for the listed building application. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Councillor Morrison, as the officer said, it's a bit confusing a little bit. There's all these little problems that we would bring up or could bring up on a full application, but it's not concerning the listed building. It's where, apart from the light, this skylight. So, should we deal with the skylight first? So we've got. Do you want to propose that a condition is put on about skylight?
Yes.
Yep.
Your mic, excuse me, your mic's still on.
I'm
Mike.
happy to second that.
Well,
All those in favour of that additional condition?
Yes, to explain, Chair, because the issues that I've formed into questions are of concern to those people who are here, it is important that we should answer them, even though they don't apply to this particular application.
Well, I think the skylight
Thank you.
is specific because it's interfering with the design of the listed building, isn't it?
Yes.
Whereas the waste bins are a different problem, but they're not involved with the design of the building. Anybody else want questions? Debate? No. Well, we'll go to the recommendation, which is on page 46. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Page 46, which is to grant permission for the listed building consent. All those in favour? Any abstentions?
With the additional condition.
Sorry, with the additional condition with regard to the skylight. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Right. Oh, you can remain. You're welcome to remain. Sorry?
Just do that vote again. Can we do that?
Do the vote again. All right.
The recommendation is as per 46.
Oh, yes. So, okay. Yeah. So I just needed a clarification. So the recommendation to grant planning permission with the additional condition for the skylight. All those in favour? That's it. Just for clarity.
So it's approved.
Yep. So you're welcome to